there are third-party dynamic pricing tools available that attach to your Airbnb listing. I use one called pricelabs, and that software is attached through an API directly to the data at Airbnb, and it knows precisely how many people are searching for a property in a given area, every specific.
You found the Real Estate Law Podcast, because real estate is more than just pretty pictures, and law goes well beyond the paperwork and courtroom arguments. If you're a real estate professional or looking to build real estate expertise, then welcome to the conversation and discover more at realestatelawpodcast.com.
Thank you for listening to the Real Estate Law Podcast. We have another great episode today. I am your host, Jason Muth, along with real estate broker and real estate attorney Rory Gill from Next Home Titletown Real Estate and Urban Village Legal in Boston. And Rory, I have been looking forward to this episode for a long time because I never sound like an idiot when I'm talking Airbnb, because we're doing that and we have an Airbnb expert, coach, operator, financially independent gentleman from Maryland. This is Culin Tate. And we can't wait to hear more about his story, because it really feels like the story that we're writing as well, doesn't it?
I'm very excited to jump into a topic that is near and dear to us and see what our trajectory could be. Ultimately, this is a path for us for financial freedom. It's a topic that we know a good amount about and something we're happy to talk about. So with that, let's welcome on Culin.
Thank you, gentlemen. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, welcome. When we booked this, we were reading up on your background, and I kind of had this date circled in red on my calendar saying, all right, we got another great Airbnb episode coming up. We did one a long time ago with an amazing host named Natalie Palmer. She is also an ambassador for Airbnb, and it was just such a good episode. The conversation flowed so well. So I've been looking forward to this conversation just to see what you're up to here on the East Coast, how you got about doing all your Airbnbs, all this great work that you're doing, setting yourself up for financial independence and setting your family up for lots of dad time with the kids.
Yes.
I think that's really what this leads to. So Culin, tell us your story. Tell us how you started in the short-term rental space. And, that's probably a good starting point.
Yeah, and it started really full tilt in 2018. I had sold a company. I've always been an entrepreneur, really never had a W-2 type job, and was really scratching my head thinking, what's next? What's the next great idea? What's the next big thing? And I had 2 properties that were vacation rental properties, and they were doing really well in terms of cash flow. And I thought, well, I've always been very curious about real estate. I've done a little commercial, done a little bit of long-term, but this short-term stuff is really exciting to me. It really, really resonates with me. And so I decided to jump in 2018, and I ended up buying a wholesale property from a wholesaler. I ended up buying an on-market MLS property and then an off-market property from the owner who owned that MLS listing. And so those 3 properties really kind of kickstarted me to, go dive deeply into, being not just having an Airbnb listing, but being a short-term rental investor and really honing my processes and technologies.
Mm-hmm. How many properties do you have now?
I have 9.
9. Are they all in the same geography?
So 8 of which, it's kind of a 2-sided portfolio, 8 of which is really the primary operations, is in the Shenandoah Valley, which is part of the Blue Ridge Mountain chain in sort of central Virginia. And then there's this one outlier, which was actually our first short-term rental property, which is a condo in the Caribbean, Turks and Caicos Islands.
Yeah. Do you use any of the properties yourself when you're going on vacation?
Yeah, actually, particularly the Turks and Caicos property. We'll actually head in there next Friday for 2 weeks. We historically spend 2 to 4 weeks a year at that one. It's an interesting property in that, as I said, there's kind of 2 sides of the portfolio. That is a sort of legacy property that we've owned, and it doesn't really cash flow from a investment perspective. It's it sort of ties into some of the things I teach about the beach, basically, which is the beach is hard to make money. It's hard to really create strong cash flow in all beach markets, and particularly the Caribbean is very expensive. So it pays its mortgage, and it's on a short 15-year note, so it's not losing anything. It'll be paid off here in 5 or 6 years, so that's a plus, but wouldn't buy it again as a cash flowing property.
Yeah.
That's the story that I think we've heard a lot and encountered a lot. People who kind of enter the short-term rental space because they're looking to subsidize a property that they intend to use as a vacation home. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that as an approach, as a way to get that second home that you dreamed of. But
Absolutely.
It's different again a little bit for a true short-term rental investor, which is, I think, more in line with what you're doing in the Shenandoah Valley.
Correct. Two sides, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde kind of story there. But yeah, so yeah, it's positive in that we do use it 3-4 weeks out of the year, and it's beautiful property and a beautiful island, and it pays for itself. So that's a win. But in terms of financial freedom and generating cash flow, I prefer things not at the beach.
Right. I mean, it also probably appreciates in value, and there's some tax benefits to having it, I'd imagine, and then 15 years later, it's yours free and clear. Yeah,
which at this point is in 6 years from now. So
yeah, 6 years. And yeah, not a cash flowing thing. I mean, a lot of people that are getting into the short-term rental game, whether they're owning properties or they're doing arbitrage or they are, just hosting, they're looking for cash flow. When you have scaled to the point that you have right now in the Shenandoah Valley, where you have a number of systems, I'm guessing, with your properties, and they sound like they cash flow really well. I want to really get into that in a second. Then you're allowed to kind of carry that other property that is the outlier, and you're not relying on that to pay your personal mortgage or feed your family.
Right.
So let's talk about your primary properties, though. I mean, like, you've clustered 8 of them in a similar area. Did you do that intentionally, or did it just kind of build itself out that way?
I would say I did it intentionally. The whole Blue Ridge Mountain chain, is great, right? Mm-hmm. It's, anywhere couple hour, 2-3 hour drive from a major metropolitan area where you can find a location where properties are being sold from the use case of this was just a family getaway place. Be it a lake house, a river house, mountain house. When the use case is, family getaway, and you can buy it at that type of price per square foot price point, and then repurpose that asset into a full occupancy short-term rental business, that's where the real strong opportunity is in that repurposing. I focus them all in the same county. It's just scale up operations. I can go and bounce between them really easily when I need to.
I've seen on your social media, it looks like you work on your properties yourself at times. Talk about buying turnkey versus buying something that needs a lot of work.
My wife and I, operate the renovations together. She likes to say she likes to buy them crispy, meaning that, some deferred maintenance would be the professional term, and then put, her own touches on them, do more renovations. I prefer a little more turnkey, but really it boils down to, what's available, what you can find in the market, and what fits your skill set. If you're working a 9-to-5 W-2 job, you might not have, this last property, my wife's actually polishing floors right now at a place. We've basically in and out of it for the last 2 months, right? Because it needed renovation. So not everybody has the time to do that, right? So if you are working a full-time job, then something a little more turnkey where you can go spend a few weekends and get it ready is a better approach.
Yeah. But you started this in 2018, you said. So it's only been a couple of years. Yeah.
Yeah, 4 years.
We bought our first place in 2016 just to, kind of compare some notes. I was working a W-2 job that whole time. I think that I started at that last position 5 months before we bought the first place. And we honestly had no idea what we were doing. We bought it not quite on a whim. We bought it with intent. Like, it was down the street from some family members, and we knew we'd be visiting that area a lot. And it just seemed like a really good deal. So we bought it, and sure enough, turned into a great deal where we used the property, but we also rented it, turned into a great cash flowing property where we eventually bought the lots next door to build on, which we're doing right now, and then bought the property right next to that to do another Airbnb. And that one just went live as we record this, just went live this week. We just got 2 bookings in the past 2 days.
Congratulations.
So yeah, thank you. And I mentioned to you before we hit record, I'm like, if I get one more booking this week, I'm jacking the prices up today. So that leads me to pricing. So, if you can give some advice to some people that are saying, geez, this sounds awesome. I don't know where to begin. I don't even know where to charge. Like, what would you say? There's a
great technological and process answer to that. So 95% of hosts are doing what I call like set it and forget it pricing, right? Mm-hmm. $200 a night, plug it into the calendar. And what happens is your weekends fill up real quick and your weekdays stay vacant. So if that sounds familiar to anybody, the solution is a technological one. There are third-party dynamic pricing tools available that attach to your Airbnb listing. I use one called pricelabs. And that software is attached through an API directly to the data at Airbnb, and it knows precisely how many people are searching for a property in a given area every specific day. It knows that historic information as well, and it knows the current occupancy. So with a software like that, you would set a base price of, say, $200, and then the software would adjust automatically for you your price upwards in the case of high demand. So let's say there's a concert coming in town, or a fair, or it's a college graduation weekend. It would apply a factor to that $200 price, and maybe that makes your weekend price more like $400. And so on the other side, if the property is vacant next Tuesday and Wednesday night of next week, it will say, well, that's pretty close. Let's start cutting those prices down. And so what that does is it maximizes your revenue by getting those higher prices, but equally important, it maximizes your occupancy. A lot of people don't think of Airbnb as a search engine, but it is. It's an interest algorithm. And so when you can start thinking about, well, what would the algorithm prefer? What are the things that are going to make the algorithm like me better? Meaning they have to decide in which order to show properties. So if there's 300 properties in a market, you can't show them all at once, and it doesn't make sense to show them randomly. So it will show them, there's a lot of factors, but think about what's important to the algorithm, to the company, which is they only get paid their service fees when your place books. So the place that books the most and closes the most leads, converts the most views into a booking, will be preferred by the algorithm, therefore will be shown higher in rank placement, and it's a self-feeding circle. So pricing for occupancy.
What percentage of people would you guess are using dynamic tools like this, versus the set it and forget it model?
About 5%.
Yeah.
Very low.
I was thinking single digit percentage as well. We actually are not doing that right now, but I have 5 tools that are on my list to vet right now. Now that I'm no longer working my W-2 job and I get to do this full time. So our objective is to scale this up a little bit more. And, we're actively searching for another 1 or 2 investment properties, maybe short term, probably long term, just to kind of diversify a little bit. But some other tools, what are some other tools that you're using? Is there anything else besides the dynamic pricing tool?
Yeah, so the next big headache, and these are things that I discovered when I went from, just kind of 2 hobby properties to buying the 3 in that summer range and getting real specific. And, all of a sudden now you've got to figure out operations. So I was spending a lot of time messaging guests. And there's another technology, another software as a service called Hospitable, which is an automated messaging system. So when a guest books through Instant Book, they automatically receive instantaneously a message back from Hospitable that we've customized. It says, thank you for booking, and here's everything that you need to know about visiting this area. Right? Jason, if you were coming to DC, and said, what am I going to do? What should I do? What should I see? I'm going to send you a long email with, all my favorite restaurants and attractions, right? So that automated message goes out. So all of the messaging with the guests is automated. So their check-in message that goes out 3 days before they check in, automated, Wi-Fi passwords, all that kind of stuff. Then we check in with them after 24 hours in the stay. How's everything going? Is everything all right? That heads off any type of, the toaster didn't work during my whole stay. So it also decreases your operational time and increases your kind of touch with the guests, which leads to higher reviews, which is also important.
Right. Because that's another factor that Airbnb will use to rank your property or drop it further down their rankings. If you as a host have poor ratings, they're going to rank properties that are hosted by people that have higher ratings higher than yours.
That's very strong. Yeah, it's a very, very strong driver, the placement.
I want to ask about your philosophy of outsourcing and using these different tools for automation, because I feel a tension between the idea that it's sometimes great to do everything yourself so you understand what's going on. And by that, I mean, when we first started doing our rentals, it was nice to do a few cleanings ourselves, to experience the place ourselves, so we know what's involved with all of those things. Then also messaging the guests by, manually every single time, just so we understand what the conversations are. But if we continued on that forever, we would be inundated with that level of work for every single listing. So I wanted to ask, before we, go too far into all the specific tools and ways to automate, what's your philosophy of outsourcing and automating?
Yeah, I think there's one is spending time in your listing, and we definitely advocate spending a lot of time in your listing, particularly as you're setting it up. Kind of my book answer is, try to spend a week. As I was saying, this last place that we're renovating, we've probably spent 2 months there. We know that the hot water heater gurgles. We know my wife heard a little critter overhead a few nights ago, and it was time to call the pest management company, right? So we do advocate spending, particularly during the setup phase, a good amount of time in your property. And that's why I always advocate starting locally, start, nearby, start in a place that you're passionate about. In terms of the automations and guest communications, I guess I maybe oversimplified the automated messaging. Messages go out, but we see the messages coming in from the guests also. We run the Airbnb app on our phones. And so we're watching all of the communications. And you still receive, specific questions from the guests. Where's the lighter? Where's the charcoal? The automation is taking care of the heavy lifting, the rote lifting, but we're still monitoring all of the communications and specific guest needs and responding.
Let's talk a little bit about neighbors. All your properties in the same town or the same city, and how have some of the neighbors reacted to some of their homes within the same communities becoming short-term rentals?
So luckily I'm in a county that has historically been a, cabin type getaway community. I will tell one story. So I do have a property, and it's basically top of a mountain kind of neighborhood. Well, the property is sort of the highest in the neighborhood, and it's kind of a mountainous type neighborhood. And it's a mix. There's probably 50 homes in the neighborhood and maybe a dozen short-term rentals. And this is a rural type of neighborhood. So we did have a situation where the board director came to us and said, the neighbors are getting kind of PO'd. And I said, what's going on? They said, well, your guests are flying up and down this road. People are worried about their dogs, are worried about their kids. They're just maybe generally irked, that there's traffic through their neighborhood. So we got real proactive about it. I bought signs that said, kids at play, hung them on the roads at my own cost. And then I put a specific message in my system saying, hey guests, we've had previous guest has, really, was driving unsafely. These are mountain roads. Please mind the neighbors. And everybody writes back, oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. Ended the problem like that. Yeah. So, you just have to be a little bit creative and work with your neighbors. You're on the same side. You're not the renter investor. You're the neighbor, right? So, there was a similar situation where somebody's like, there's going to be trouble up there. And I'm like, I've got cameras there. You want the driver's license, or you want the license plate? I'm on your side. Yeah, we don't want any trouble either.
Yeah. Have you had trouble with parties at all? I know Airbnb just changed their policy, and I believe they're not allowing any parties at properties now.
Out of 2,000 odd guest stays, I had one situation where I came into a house. They didn't bother the neighbors, but there was obviously 5 or 6 people, and there was like red juice everywhere, right? So they were partying. There's some technologies that you can use if you're concerned about that. There's technologies that monitor for sound in the house and will alert your phone. It's a threshold. There's technologies that, like little plug-in smoke detectors. There's a technology that will monitor the number of cellular devices in the house and let you know. There's devices that will monitor for tobacco or cannabis smoke and notify you. So there are some things that can be done about that. And some people use some, exterior cameras.
Yeah. We have Google Wi-Fi, and we check every so often to see how many devices are on. You can see people's device names. Just started leaving some signs around the house about smoking. We haven't really had smoking issues in the house. I did have somebody that must have had a container of cannabis in one of our dressers because, wow, that smell remains for a long time. So, in New Hampshire it's actually not recreationally legal, although Massachusetts it is. A lot of people turn a blind eye around here, but we just encourage people not to be using any of those products inside the house.
Inside,
is what we said. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about your coaching though, because you have worked with students both online in some mastermind courses. You've written books before. I'm sure you get questions all the time about how did you get into this, or what are the things that I can do to get into this business. Let's talk about some of the people that are just starting out. Like, what is some good, quick, actionable advice that you can give to the person that just wants to get that first place?
We call it finding your where. Sit down, with your spouse, your significant other, or friends, and think about, where do I like to go? Do I like to go ski? Do I like to go hike? Do I like to go to wineries? So sort of brainstorm, where do you personally like to spend time? If you had a long weekend, where would you go? And where do other people in the area, like to go? And find a place that you're going to be passionate about, that you're not going to mind spending, a month of Sundays, so to speak, there getting it ready, right? Mm-hmm. My son loves to fish. And so when we go for a weekend, we bring the fishing rods and he hits the pond or the river while we're, hanging light fixtures. So my first advice is don't go to a list of where's the hottest market, and try to, invest in Miami from Boston, right? Where do people in Boston go when they've got a 3-day weekend? Where would you take your spouse for a romantic, anniversary getaway? Mm-hmm. And find a place like that. Find your where.
And within the market, there are sort of the premier destinations that, everybody likes to go, and in some ways that they're obvious. But we've had good luck with, I will say the secondary kind of destinations in the area, because you never know how many people are traveling to that area for college graduations, for weddings, for all those other things that make up a great shoulder season, particularly in those areas that are, maybe not the premier destination, but in the general vicinity of it, because they have less hotel infrastructure, right, and you have kind of less obvious competition on the platforms.
Yes. So I tell people there's a couple of things you can do there. First you can brainstorm those areas, and then if you want to dive in and check them out. So I like to see, let's say, there's a town outside of Boston that has some draw that you're interested in, Rory, and let's plug that into Airbnb and see if it's supporting other listings. I was actually just did a presentation in York, Pennsylvania, and was doing a coaching call. And this person has a house and she's moving to Philadelphia, and she's like, I think I put it on Airbnb. I don't know if it's going to work or not. So the first thing we did is we went to Airbnb and we said, well, how many entire houses are for let on Airbnb? And it was 173. So if there's 173 people that are choosing to keep their property as a short-term rental, they didn't sell it, they're not turning it into a long-term rental, that means there's enough demand there to support a good listing. Mm-hmm. The other thing that we can do, so I like to see more than 100, maybe less than 600, 700, 1,000, right? It's kind of hard to stand out in Miami or Atlanta, where there's thousands of listings, because we want to get to the top, right? That's the goal. We don't want to be on page 10. We don't want to be on page 5. We want to be on page 1 so we can get the most views and charge the most, right? So a market big enough to sustain over 100 listings, but, definitely under 1,000. The other thing that we can do to evaluate the market, there's another software called AirDNA, and it's a subscription-based software. I think it's different for each market, but I think I pay like $25 a month for my market, and it will give you a lot of data. It'll give you the average daily rate for all the listings. It will give you the average occupancy for all the listings, some investability scores, some regulation scores, rental growth numbers. So if you're the analytic type that likes to dig in and boil the ocean on those numbers, it's a great place to also then figure out, if this is a good market, what's the average property making? Is it making $2,000 a month, or is it making $8,000 a month? Mm-hmm. And then the things that we talked about earlier in the program, we're not striving to be the average daily rate or the average occupancy. We can take that average daily rate and then pump it up to, we're shooting for 90-95% occupancy, mm-hmm, by using the strategies that we discussed for pricing for occupancy.
So, Rory, Culin just mentioned AirDNA, and I think we just got a little lucky with our first property. And I'll tell a little story here. The one that we just launched, which we bought last fall, and you also mentioned, a bunch of Sundays, renovating the place, be somewhere that you wouldn't mind being. That was our life. That was our life last fall. Been there, done that. But the company that we used for financing for that property, this one's in an LLC, and we actually used, who was the lender, Rory? Do you remember?
We used Host Financial.
Yep. Host Financial. Okay. So they actually tap into AirDNA to, run their numbers, basically, because that's the system. I don't think that we had to supply income or anything for that property, right? I think it was all based on the property.
So we hit a snag with that. So they underwrite their debt service coverage ratio based on AirDNA data for the area. We actually didn't have enough data in our immediate market for AirDNA to function. So we were able to use our own comparable next door but it impacted our lending options because AirDNA didn't have sufficient data in the specific area where we are located.
Which tells me that, we kind of have a sleeping giant, I think, because we know how well the property that we've been operating has been doing. It could probably do even more. I bet you, Culin, if you were to take a look at our listings and whatnot, you'd probably find a way to squeeze another 20, 30% of it. No doubt in my mind. But AirDNA just didn't have the data. And, then we ended up having to put, I think, 25% down instead of 20% down, which, we did. That's fine. Right. Suddenly there's a couple more listings right where we are. So, let's chat about that a little bit. Like how do you know when something is too saturated? A lot of people want to get into this space because you could make a lot more money on short-term rentals for the same property versus a long-term rental. But, what is the upside here? Are we cooking the golden goose?
So, you'd asked earlier why I am focused kind of in one county. And one of the reasons is risk, right? So I know I don't have to run detailed analysis. I know exactly what a 2-bedroom in that vicinity is going to make because I've got 6 of them and they all make about the same amount, right? And I'm going to do the same decor and I'm going to run the same operations, right? So how do you know when too many people, like I said before, I don't really like to, I want to be number one, right? I want my clients to be, I build first page hosts, right? I want you to be on page 1 and I'm going to monitor that. I'm going to teach you how to monitor where exactly you are in your ranking listings. There's another software there, by the way. But yeah, getting over 5, 6, 7, 800 listings, that gets to be a little bit more challenging. So yeah, I'd like to stay, under those really oversaturated markets.
Yeah.
That's like what Rory was saying, like, what about the secondary market? Yeah, I favor the secondary market. Let's find those undiscovered places where 3 wineries have popped up or up-and-coming markets like that.
Yeah, or the place that might be, a half hour away from the primary market or the town next to the primary market. One thing we've lucked out on is that it's a destination unto itself, but it's a quick 30 to 60-minute drive in any direction from a cool attraction. Whether you're going to Lake Winnipesaukee, which is a big lake in New Hampshire, that's a half-hour drive. You're going to the seacoast in New Hampshire, that's a 45-minute drive. You're going to the seacoast in Maine, that's a 45-minute drive. You're going outlet shopping, that's under an hour. There's just any draw
a lot to do.
A lot to do. And that's why probably the beach doesn't do as well. They're probably way oversaturated. All the places look probably about the same. And, you kind of have, there's a lot of attractions at the beach, but like people are going there to get sun.
My problem with beach type properties is that we're not getting that reclassification of the asset, right? So like I have a beach property, it pays its mortgage, I get to enjoy it, but it doesn't cash flow. The reason most beach places don't cash flow as strongly is because there's already a rental component baked in. And anytime you're buying a beach house, all the comparables have been sold on the assumption that there's at least, a 12-week rental season, right? Mm-hmm. So if you buy a beach house and you don't plan to ever rent it, you're still paying a premium price per square foot because 90% of the other properties sold in that market have some rental roll baked into the price.
Right. Shifting gears, what is some of your thoughts on Airbnb arbitrage, which, as I understand it, it's where you're renting a place from somebody and then you're resubletting it out essentially on Airbnb, but you don't own the property.
It's not my approach, but so everything that I teach, everything in the book, all the things we've talked about, pricing, all still apply. Right? You just don't own the property. I think it's a good way to start, perhaps, if you don't have capital. You're young and you're just, hustling and want to learn the craft. I think is one of the biggest things that you would get out of, from my perspective, is that you're now going to have a property to experiment with and learn and set up your systems and learn the craft before making an investment.
Yeah. I've always kind of equated it to like wholesaling, where you're kind of looking to bring cash in relatively quickly. You're not really taking ownership of the property. But you bring up a great point. Like honing your craft and building your systems, we had to do that ourselves. Like you, Rory, myself, with that first property, you sign the papers, you say, all right, well, let's figure it out, right? Roll up your sleeves, start painting.
Yep.
How about co-hosting? Have you worked with students who are just looking to kind of get into the hosting game?
I have 3 or 4 clients that are professional co-hosts. Yeah.
Just go into like what that is for people that are listening to this podcast saying.
So let's say you're ready to make an investment and you've got a good place picked out, but you don't necessarily have the time or inclination to do the management. So a co-host is someone who handles the operations for you. Very similar to a property management company, but this is more of a freelancer that understands, has honed their craft, right? And they have give them access to your Airbnb account. They have their own logins as a co-host, and they manage your operations. Maybe they would set the pricing. They would manage the housekeepers. They would do all the guest messaging, and you as the investor can just collect rents and expenses.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Rory, do you want to throw in any kind of legal questions to Culin and maybe anything that he's encountered in setting up Airbnbs on the law side?
I mean, this is a question where I think I already know his answer to some degree, but with anybody who's doing Airbnb, I always have to ask, what is your backup plan B in case regulations change? How do you keep abreast of what's going on in your area? But what are you planning for in case the rules change?
Mm-hmm. Regulation is the big legal issue, in Airbnb. So it starts with your property selection, right? So regulation can take place, at a state or a county level, but it could also take place at an HOA level, right? So I have looked at properties near my properties in the same state, maybe like one county away, where the county has no restrictions, but an HOA could have a restriction. So the first layer of protection is to buy a property that currently is not regulated. I also like to buy properties in markets that are historically been short-term rental destinations, right? So short-term rental has been around for hundreds of years, right? We've been renting cabins and beach places and lake houses we just did it through a property management company. Airbnb has just now empowered the individual. When COVID hit, we did have an on-set regulation. So our county, was fearful and restricted a short-term rental use. And they defined that by anything less than 28 days. So we basically pivoted into longer stays.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, same thing happened to us in Provincetown. Remember, Rory, a couple of years ago when COVID first hit and basically the town kind of locked it down. I mean, we actually had to have a rental license there, which we do. And they said no more short-term rentals for the foreseeable future, which they eventually opened back up again when the summer started.
That was an interesting time just for regulatory reasons and just matters of what was going on with international travel. Everything kind of came to a screeching halt. But then our faraway guests were shortly replaced by local guests who wanted to travel just a state away or so. The other, regulatory issue that I kind of want to ask, or I should say the legal question I want to ask, is how do you vet your guests? What criteria are you looking at? Do you have any interesting ways to predict who's going to be a good guest and who's going to be a bad guest?
I vet my guests the same way Marriott and Ritz-Carlton vet their guests, right? Which is I operate a business, right? Mm-hmm. We do require that function in Airbnb is called instant booking because they want you to be operating like, a hotel. They do require a government-issued identification. Airbnb has their own insurance and support called Air Cover, which is basically an insurance product in case of damages. And then we carry commercial insurance. So that's actually a good point maybe as a takeaway, which is if you do have a short-term rental or you're thinking about starting one, make sure to have a real frank conversation with your insurance agent because the insurance that you would put on a long-term rental is very different than what you would need for a short-term rental. When you get into a short-term rental, basically, the short answer here is that it needs to be on a commercial policy. And so be very specific. All you need to do is ask your insurance agent, make it very clear that this is a short-term rental. It's going to be used on Airbnb and it's a commercial endeavor, and they're going to write you a different type of policy.
That's awesome.
So that's the other layer of protection, right? Is your personal insurance policy.
Yeah.
Across 2,000 guests, I had one $450 damage claim. It's kind of like when Uber first came out and everybody was like, well, that's crazy. I'm not going to ride in somebody else's car. That sounds dangerous. But personally, I feel now, Uber driver, I'm rating him. He's rating me. It's a community. They're bending over backwards to be, on time and prompt and provide mints in the back seat and stuff like that. I think Airbnb as a community is sort of the same thing. As a super host, I am going above and beyond for my guests, and my guests know that I'm going to rate them also. And, back to the Uber example, if you're a bad passenger, you get a rating too. Not a lot of people know that, right? So you might not get picked up next time. So same thing with guests is they know that they're being held accountable through a rating system. And if they don't follow the house rules, they're potentially going to get a bad rating and not be able to book again in the future.
It's partly why we only use Airbnb and Vrbo. We do have our listings on VRBO as well because of all the protections that the sites offer. We will rent to friends or referrals from the neighborhood or repeat guests if they want to book directly with us. I know that there's a really big movement in direct bookings, which we have not done our direct booking engine just yet. Are you doing that, or are you doing everything through Airbnb?
I am the absolute, I am not an advocate. We could have a whole show on that.
Separate.
We could have a whole separate show on that. There, for a lot of reasons, I'm a single platform person. And just think about it. Really, the quick answer is if the algorithms are placing you based on what you're feeding them, the revenues that you're generating for them. If I'm on 3 platforms and I'm spreading that revenue across 3 platforms, I'm not actually going to get 3 times the views. Right? I'm going to get less views because I'm going to get less placement. So I feel it's very detrimental to be on multiple platforms.
Let's talk about your book, and then we'll get into our final questions, because it looks like you just published it earlier this year. It's Host Coach, a blueprint for creating financial freedom through short-term rental investing. How did that come about? I mean, 2017, you weren't doing any of this stuff. Now you have 9 properties and a book.
Started my portfolio, I got real good at, I was able to sort of compare and contrast between properties, experiment with a lot of things. And it really, my friends started coming to me, realizing like, how much money are you making with this stuff? And I had the opportunity to see if I could relocate, my processes in different areas. Did I just get lucky in my hometown, right? And I found that those were repeatable. And so that led to more and more people calling me, asking me for advice, friends, family, friends of friends, right? And that turned into a kind of the coaching aspect. And then I got asked to speak to a group of Keller Williams real estate agents in Wilmington, North Carolina. So I had to, instead of just sort of talking to people, put all this in an organized presentation. And that presentation then became the outline for Host Coach, the book. And we're driven to write that just to share the knowledge that we have is so powerful. And it really, Jason, you said you kind of hit like 3 properties. That's usually about the magic number where people, a lot of the people I coach, it's one of the people persons in the relationships looking to get out of a job, looking for a second career. At just a few properties, we can start to break away and really achieve financial freedom, and that's super exciting to me. Like, I have my financial freedom. I know what it's done for me, and I'm just on a mission to help other people do the same thing.
We spoke with another great guest a few months ago, Michael Dominguez, and he had 10 properties, and that was his magic number where he got to the financial freedom point somewhere along the way. And I think that, a lesson here is that we listen to so many podcasts and you hear of these people that have, 750 doors they talk about. Right. And if you want to be that, that's great. All right. But you don't have to be that to be successful or financially independent through real estate. I mean, like, you're showing how you could do it with under 10 properties. We're at 3 with a 4th that's coming in line in January, and money to invest, so like we're kind of right there also at that precipice. And, if you're listening, trying to get out of a career that, you want your second career, or you have that first property and you don't know if you could parlay that into the second or third, it's worth a shot. I mean, you don't need to have 750 doors to have enough cash to live the rest of your life financially free and happy. And
this is a golden opportunity. I grew up and, parents of friends, had the beach house that they bought for $50,000, and now it's 500 or $1 million. And I always ask myself, where are those deals for our generation? And I am a very firm believer that this is the opportunity. This is the moment for our generation where we can get in, not like you said, don't need millions of dollars and 750 units, that we've got an opportunity to get in, get started with something that will create generational wealth.
Yeah. Well, you've built some great systems, and we're eager to have you back on in the future also to talk more about how your properties have been going, and your next book that you're going to write, and your next coaching class, and whatever the future has to hold.
There are some fun things in the works. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, like, I think for all of us, it's kind of cool when you don't have to punch in somewhere and you get time to focus on, your properties and focus on thinking about what the next step is. Let's get into our final 3 questions that we ask of all of our guests just to get to know you a little bit better. And then we'll give you the opportunity to tell everyone where they can find you. The first question that we have is, I think it's a pretty simple one, and we might know your answer, but maybe it's entirely different. If you can get on stage for a half hour and talk about any subject in the world with zero preparation, what would that be?
Well, yeah, the easy answer is obviously I'm passionate about talking about short-term rentals, right? I'm also really enthralled at the moment with my son and his sports and lacrosse tryouts, and he's kind of getting recruited into high schools and stuff like that. So that's been a passion, something I would speak passionately about with no preparation as well.
So I grew up in a lacrosse school too. I did not play, but I grew up in New York and went to a prep school in Westchester County. And like, there's a couple pockets of lacrosse. Like Maryland is a pocket of lacrosse in the United States. If you're listening to this out west or in the South or anything, you're probably thinking lacrosse.
It's a big deal here on the East Coast.
Oh yeah, it's a big deal on the East Coast. Second question, Rory. Oh my God, I just blanked on the second question.
Can you tell us something that happened early on in your life that impacts the way you do business or live your life today?
My parents were separated, kind of divorced at a young age. And I think I actually credit that for a lot of my drive. I don't know if I had something to prove to the world or prove to myself. I worked pretty hard in college. I remember one day in college, I was walking to class and realized it just hit me. Like, I got to feed a family someday soon. And that was another moment where I was like, I just kind of aha moment and woke up and went, I gotta make sure I'm growing up here and making sure that I'm taking the best classes because I'm gonna have to provide for a family someday, maybe not too far away.
Yeah, I always found college, I kind of went through it the way that I was told to go through it, but I ended up going to a career path that had nothing to do with the actual coursework that I did in college. And, a lot of young people listen to this podcast and other podcasts. They might be saying the same thing, like, geez, I studied this in college, but like this real estate thing sounds like a way that I could be financially free. I would say, think about what you studied in college and the relationships that you built and, apply that knowledge. Like, it doesn't have to be the knowledge you learned about history or anthropology or German language. It's the relationships and the way that you study and the way that you research that you can take into a career like this and then just continue learning.
Yeah. My wife has a biology degree and she's always, commenting like, what am I doing? A biology degree. And I remind her, well, you have a biology degree, but you worked really hard for it.
Yes.
Right. Like, it was a tough major in her school and she went after, she was going to go to med school. What's that biology degree doing for me? Not much, but the tenacity and the amount, I know how hard she worked in college and how hard she studied. That's what she learned, right? That is, it's not the cellular dynamics or organic chemistry. It was that work ethic that she has that's beyond, most.
Well, I'm going to have your wife on next time because I too have a biology degree and I too was going to go to med school and said no to both of those things.
Well, you better want to talk about Airbnb design and hospitality because that's...
I also found, I knew that the answer was not going to med school when I realized that I liked my courses outside of my major more than my major. And I took some great classes in college that were not connected to my concentration. And that was the answer right there to me. I'm like, hey, why am I doing this? I like all this other stuff instead. I mean, like, your wife found her passion with the design work, right? Final question we have for you. Tell us something that you're listening to, watching, or reading these days.
A lot of TikTok.
How old's your son?
He's 13.
There you go.
No, but the funny thing about TikTok is it's not just little kid stuff. There's great real estate stuff on there. There's great Airbnb stuff on there. There's great home improvement type stuff on there. But yeah, other books that I'm reading, I listen to a lot of podcasts on this topic of Airbnb that I about halfway through is the Airbnb story. It's the story of the founders. And when you read it, you kind of understand the platform and policies. You really kind of understand some of the history. Understanding their origin story helps you understand, what the company looks like today. So I found that pretty fascinating.
Yeah. Release changes to their policies and algorithms and some of the videos they put out. I mean, they're so well done. They really are. And they explain why they do what they do. And, they kind of put the essence of the company into you as a host. I mean, was it 2 years ago when they went public and they offered stock to their hosts?
Yeah,
I mean,
that was great.
That was great. I thought it was such a nice gesture also. And, I kind of wish I bought more, but I bought a good amount.
I was just saying, I was blessed there too. It was, they allocated, right? There was only so much.
They did.
That was a wonderful thing that they did. But yeah, you definitely understand the founders and the philosophy. Just check the book out. It's well done.
Thank you so much for spending some time with us talking about Airbnb, talking about short-term rentals and success in it. We'll have to come back for another episode also because there's so many topics that we can go into. But for now, why don't you tell everyone where they can find you if they want your advice, want to take some of your coaching, become a client of yours, learn about your properties? Yeah, the website is hostcoach.co. You can read a little bit about our background there. Also have a button just to set up a free consultation. And then kind of for the fun behind the scenes stories of us doing renovations and inspirational quotes on Instagram is just at @host_coach. Yeah. Mixed in the inspirational quotes along with photos of your renovations and photos of you and your wife and family and whatnot. It kind of humanizes the account. Thank you. Yeah, we have fun with it. Rory, where can people find you?
If people want to find me, they can find me at my real estate brokerage, which is Next Home Titletown, nexthometitletown.com, or my law practice, Urban Village Legal, urbanvillagelegal.com.
Awesome.
Oh, I guess I forgot to mention, Jason, the book Host Coach is available on Amazon, in Kindle, Audible, and paperback.
Yes, we'll put the link in the show notes right here as well so people can click directly on it and purchase Host Coach, which is an excellent listen in our case because we're audiobook people. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we'd love it if you want to give us a rating or drop us a message or reach out to us, Jason at nexthometitletown.com. We certainly appreciate all the feedback and we respond to everything that we get. And that's about it. So thank you so much for spending time with us for another episode of the Real Estate Law Podcast. Culin, Rory, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. I certainly have, and I learned a bunch of different things. And I definitely have a couple more things that I have to do for our properties ourselves as a result of this.
Yeah, it was a blast, guys. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. And thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.
This has been the Real Estate Law Podcast. Because real estate is more than just pretty pictures, and law goes well beyond the paperwork and courtroom arguments. We're powered by Next Home Titletown, Greater Boston's progressive real estate brokerage. More at nexthometitletown.com. And Urban Village Legal, Massachusetts Real Estate Council, serving savvy property owners, lenders, and investors. More at urbanvillagelegal.com. Today's conversation was not legal advice, but we hope you found it entertaining and informative. Discover more at realestatelawpodcast.com. Thank you for listening.